You're listening to the Valley Current.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
I'm good, Jack. How are you doing?
Oh, you're looking great. You're so organized there. I love that. You got your headphones on and everything.
Yeah, it's, I seem to be doing a lot of these podcasts at the moment. I've done one every day of the week, and they range from more conversational to more like, gosh, you got to have it all researched and ready for lots of people. So yeah, I'm getting into it, Jack.
Well, ours will be more conversational because I had the delight of meeting you at the Modern Elder Academy, MEA, in Baja, which is quite a fabulous organization, fabulous event, fabulous startup. We could do a whole podcast about that, but I'd rather do a podcast that focuses at least initially on you and your transformation, because I think you have a Silicon Valley story and you have a Baja story and you have a story of now getting your first book, or maybe your second or third, I don't know, you'll tell us. And so tell me more about like that journey. I know some of it, but I don't know all of it. I don't think in high school you thought the trajectory would be what it's become, but let's just start there. In high school, did you know what you wanted to do? Because I could tell you funny stories that I thought I was going to be a priest. That didn't quite, once girls entered the picture, that didn't quite work out, the Catholic Church notwithstanding. So tell me more about kind of your journey from where you thought you would go and where you went, because I think it's a good one.
High school, I was initially in Latin America in Venezuela, and then I moved across to the UK. Hence this very proper British accent. It's, I'm a fake Brit, Jack.
You could fool anyone.
Yeah, that was entirely the point. They didn't like foreigners there, so it was a good escape hatch. You know what? At high school, I really wanted to be a writer and write sort of novels and poems and those things. I was kind of a humanities kid. When I left high school, I went to university, and I remember very clearly having a discussion with a friend in my early 20s saying, I want to be someone who connects people together to create good ideas. I was thinking specifically around translating sciences into the humanities, helping people across sciences and humanities build new businesses, build new ideas. So from an early age, I was always interested in how do we design better? How do we do better systems? How do we create a better planet, I guess? So yeah, my trajectory from there was I met and started working for a Swiss multi-billionaire, a character called Stefan Schmidt-Heine, who at the time was Europe's richest man and was interested in sustainability, innovation, and impact investing. This sounds pretty current now. A lot of people talk about this type of investing.
Right.
At the time, it was just the Wild West. This was in the 90s.
Right.
And no one was talking about this stuff.
It sounds like he was a thought leader in what's now called the ESG space, right?
Very much so. He'd gone to sort of Maurice Strong's first Earth Summit and said, I think there's a role for companies here. And he had his own reasons for wanting to pursue that. His own sort of familial history had sort of put him in a position where being more thoughtful and more kind of conscious of impacts was kind of high priority for him. So yeah, I ended up starting off by writing a book for him. I was working with a character called Lloyd Timberlake and this guy, Stefan Schmidt-Heine, and we created one of the very first books on business and sustainability, right at the same time that sort of visionaries like Paul Hawken were putting out their books on kind of, new economic theories of green business.
Did you come to meet Chip Conley at that point? Sounds like you hadn't met him yet, right?
No. I went on this roller coaster journey where I was in Spain and Latin America with Stefan for 5 or 6 years. And then I came over to the Bay Area to do a startup. And I arrived just in time for the market to melt down in 2000. I'd raised capital and just everything went up in the air. But the idea that I came with was still very much extant, which was, how do you bring people together, especially in the sustainability field, to sort of shift supply chains? You know, the kind of the modern innovation paradigm is better, faster, cheaper, right? In the sustainability field, oftentimes none of those criteria are met. There's a different set of imperatives, right? We're having to look at our license to operate, or the fact that this doesn't actually work for our stakeholders or our shareholders now with the ESG investing and stuff like that. So I did a ton of work on, okay, so how do you get supply chains to come together to do investments in these areas? How do you get procurement in terms of corporations on one end of the spectrum to talk to investment, to talk to government, to talk to innovation, and actually kind of hotbox them together, put them in a room together so that they transact? And, you know, as a consulting idea, it was super frigging wacky, Jack. It was it was a wacky idea, but we got up to about 50 people, and you know we were getting people to do all kinds of investments, sort of $400 or $500 million on a variety of different platforms. And I don't know, in your own experience, if you found that there are times when you've just been working on an idea because it was an idea you had, but it's not the idea. And there was just a moment where my wife and I were like, holy cow, we are working all the time, traveling all around the world, trying to make this idea happen. And it wasn't working for us as a family, and it wasn't working for us individually. And so we just said, okay, let's go. So we drove down to Mexico.
Wow.
Yeah, literally.
That's a hard, I said, wow, because that's actually a hard drive. That's not an easy drive.
It is not. And I had a 3 and a 4-year-old in my truck. I had like a Toyota Tacoma truck, and I bundled the kids and my wife in, and we drove south. You can just take the 1 or the 101 and just keep going south and south and south. It's like an 1,100 mile drive.
With at least 4, maybe 3 or 4 overnights, right? I mean, you didn't do it in one shot. I know people do that too, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I would recommend the drive to anyone that listens to this podcast. You cross over San Diego, and you drop decades every sort of 100 miles. You know, you drop a decade every 100 miles until you get into Baja California Sur, and it feels like the 1950s here. It really does. It's changing, but yeah, it's kind of just remarkable how, from the natural environment to the physical environment to the social and cultural environment, things are just slower. They're more familiar, as I say, if you sort of look at old movies, than they are to what our current world looks like in the Bay Area.
So you had like a big aha moment where you just decided, hey, this Silicon Valley, Northern California grind, you make a lot of money, but you spend a lot of money and you kind of feel like you're a hamster in a wheel. And your wife agreed, which is great. Yeah. So we were together on this. That could be a big problem. And then you just pack up and leave. It sounds like a pretty big adventure to just say, hey, let's head down there and we'll figure out where we're going to land and where we're going to stay and what we're going to do. I mean, it's a big decision.
You know what, Jack? So this sort of starts to bridge into my current work. I was 47 and a half years old when I did that. I was going on a sabbatical. My intention was always to come home and set up a new business. So the idea was it was an Etch-a-Sketch moment, right? I was going to go to Mexico, surf, recollect myself and my family, wipe the slate clean, come back to the Bay Area and start something new. And I wasn't 100% sure of what it was going to be, but I knew I needed space and time to kind of work out what that would be. Turns out that 47 years old is the bottom of what is called the U-curve of happiness. Right. And this is a cross-cultural, it's across almost every single geographic and cultural boundary, this research shows that human beings are at their least happy at 47.7 years old. So this is a sort of significant number. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, there I was at 47.7, literally to the day, getting in a truck, driving south. I'd sort of reached peak, whatever it was, unhappiness or dissatisfaction rather than unhappiness, to have a happy life.
Right.
So yeah, that was kind of fascinating. Unbeknownst to me at the time, drove down, and on the way down, a friend of mine was like, dude, you need to look up Chip Conley. You need to go and meet Chip. We chatted on the phone. He sent me the galleys for a book of his, which was called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. Yeah. And I had a whole bunch of comments. You know me well enough to know that I had a whole bunch of comments and thoughts about the book. And he was like, well, why don't you come? I'm starting up this academy. I'm starting up this place, this midlife wisdom school for people to kind of do a pit stop in midlife. So I went down, I joined them for the first week. By the second week, I was volunteering to kind of help out. By the fifth week, I was fully enmeshed in the team. And by the time my sabbatical had ended, I'd been working the entire sabbatical. Chip and his then other business partner, a lady called Christine Sparbo, asked me to join as a partner.
Wow.
So that's how I got involved. My personal interest coming from the sustainability world had been, that's great. I really find the work you're doing interesting, but what I'm passionate about is building communities. And I wanted to build a physical community around a regenerative farm. So there was just this moment where all three of us said, okay, let's kind of zip up our purposes together. And we created Baja Sage, which is the first kind of regenerative community that we as an organization have built, which is 26 houses down here in Baja on a small regenerative farm. And
all sold already, right? All sold, right?
You know what? We sold them in peak COVID. It was the most bizarre thing. We sold them in a time when I think there was a hunger, and there is a hunger for community. There's an incredible sense of need for being in community, especially for people in midlife and beyond, and as they age. How do we find community? How do we find people that are aligned with us in terms of our purposes, our interests, our willingness to learn and grow and share and so on? So yeah, it was astonishing. I literally spent most of my time not selling. And when people were interested, I said, go home, go think about it. You don't need to make any decisions. I was like the anti-salesman, and still we sold these things. It was incredible.
You were doing something very unique because you were taking some land that's on a farm. I got to visit when I was down there. It was great. The week was great. Visiting the farm was great. And you said, we're going to build essentially a livable community on a farm. So you're going to see sustainability firsthand in your community. And I guess in theory, you can imagine this duplicating itself if there are enough farms around. I mean, that's the problem, right? Farming has become kind of industrialized. So you need a small enough farm that still has some land that you can put essentially townhouse-like structures on to build a community around for like-minded people that support the ESG message. And that's what you've done. I guess they're about 3/4 done. I saw the construction look like it was pretty far along, but they're all
we're almost
right?
They're all sold. We're almost done. You know what? We tapped into a movement. We definitely weren't the authors of the movement, Jack. There was there's a trend of what's called agri-hoods. So instead of having a golf course at the center of your community, there are these agri-hoods where you put a farm at the center of your community, and you can, I think what is attractive to people about it is you eat the food off of your own land. An acre, a well-tended acre, even here in Baja, where, we don't have as much rain as in the Bay Area sometimes, or depending.
Right.
A well-tended acre can feed 50 families.
That's amazing.
It's astonishing.
A lot of people wouldn't know that. They think, oh, you have to have at least 100 acres to do that, right?
That's right. That's right. And, you know, the economics here in Baja shift from the Bay Area. The cost of capital is much higher here. The cost of labor is much cheaper.
I just did a quick search. I don't know that I've gone here before, but it came up quickly. Baja Sage Farm Community.
There you go.
It shows the intent. I saw it. It's like
close.
It's pretty close. Yeah. And it tells a story of what came out of this design. I imagine this must be something that was used during the process and tells a story, right? And it's sold quickly, so it obviously means people are looking for this kind of community. The funny part of this is last night I was watching, because we've been traveling, so I didn't get to watch the Succession episode 6. I don't know if you watch any television, but that's a great show. And it talked about how they're trying to create a Disney-like community in Succession. Like if I showed you the video, you'd crack up, because it's the opposite of what you're doing. They're bringing all of these Disney-like characters into a golf-like community for older people. You would crack up. If I showed you the video, just that segment, you'd say, this is the opposite of what we're trying to do in Baja, and bringing people to a farm to kind of realize where their food is coming from. But it's a brilliant idea, and you're really the architect of it, right?
Yeah, you know, it's also fascinating. I think a lot of times people say, oh, you know, to build a community, you have to have shared values. And there's definitely something to that. But I'm not sure that in any community, whether it's your office or your work or whatever you're doing, you have to have shared values. I think what you have to have is shared intentions. Right? What's at the center of a community? If you're around a golf course, the intention is to play a lot of golf, right? Right. If you're around a farm and you've got sort of shared eating areas and so on, and a place to come together to learn and do things, there's a very different intentionality. And one of the things that the Academy as a whole is really interested in how do you move people from this. That in midlife, the psychologist Erik Erikson talks about this split where we have a choice basically to either stagnate or get generative. Generativity, as opposed to regenerativity, is continuing to grow, continuing to learn, continuing to have purpose, continuing to evolve as you age. A lot of us get stuck. Stagnation, here's another 47. So we talked about 47 being the bottom of the U curve of happiness. Americans, when they retire, watch up to 47 hours of television a week.
Wow, that's terrible.
So I'm not even up to, sorry, I misspoke. It is an average of 47 hours a week. So a lot of people in retirement, they've been given this extra lease on life and this option to do stuff. And we go into stagnation. Why? Because we're scared, because we're lonely, because we're isolated, because we have no good models, all of these things. And so oftentimes what the Academy can do for people is to say, no, you know, if you're in your 50s, our target demo is around their mid-50s.
Right.
If you're in your 50s, you've got 30 years, which is as much adulthood in front of you as the adulthood that you have behind you.
Right.
So that's a kind of a fascinating reframing of aging, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
I mean,
it's kind of...
We talk about, I've been supporting Stanford's view that health span may become equal to lifespan, and both may exceed 100 years, which of course is way beyond 80. And so if you put that metric up of as our kids or our grandkids may live over 100 with health spans over 100, work span inevitably, or what might be called, you know, thinking span, brain span, is going to exceed the normal. You know, you retire at age 65 and you basically shut the lights out at age, 70 after 5 years of miserable retirement, right? That's kind of the storyline in America. Like, it's the sad American diet, only the sad American life. And in many ways, I think that model has got to be completely broken. And that's what you're doing at MEA.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it. But is MEA connected to Sage in some way? Like, are people Baja Sage?
Yeah.
Tell us how that is, because MEA is really a separate entity, right? A whole separate transition. Tell us about that.
So MEA was created by Chip Conley, and myself and Christine joined him as sort of founding partners. But Chip was the kind of the author of MEA in many, many ways. Sage was the real estate was definitely kind of the project that I brought to the table, and then Chip, Christine, and myself kind of co-designed both sides of those things. Chip's one of the lead investors in the real estate project, alongside myself. So the two of us kind of developed that project together. I think what's happened since we did that organically as two businesses that sat side by side, the model shifted. We're now growing into Santa Fe, where we have a 2,500 acre horse ranch. We have a property in downtown Santa Fe up on Museum Hill called Sunmount, and we have a community development site of about 500 acres where we're actively looking to say, okay, can we do this, build community, build sites in Santa Fe, build academies, so that kind of generative living becomes not only our offer, but something that we're doing across multiple sites and multiple campuses. It's exciting.
So New Mexico will have some real estate development, sounds like.
Yes, sir. Yeah. We're taking our time. We're setting up the academies first. There's some real sensitivities in New Mexico, particularly where the ranch is around water and so on and so forth. So I think we're being careful to get whatever we do right, both for ourselves as a business and for that local community.
So you're really expanding from Mexico to New Mexico. It's like,
from old to new.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story if you think about it, because most people would be like, how could you do this in Mexico? Could you get enough talent? Could you get enough help? Could you get enough transportation? And you're right on the beautiful beach in a beautiful part of Baja. I mean, Pescadero was basically a quiet, I know because I've been going there for over 35 years and own some property there. But conceptually, it was like very quiet, very old school fishing town, then surfing town. And Cerritos Beach, of course, is a beautiful beach as well, as is Todos Santos. But conceptually, a lot of people wouldn't even know how to get there. Like they say, okay, you get to SJD, San Jose del Cabo, and where do you go from there? And a lot of people would be like, they get lost. But you guys have staked out a very beautiful facility there. And it sounds very much like you're going to do something much grander and huger in New Mexico, or are in the process of doing that now, right?
Yeah, and I would say different rather than grander and huger. It's definitely got similar overtones. It feels very home-like and intimate, which was architecturally something that we were interested both in New Mexico and Old Mexico. It's one of the questions that you sort of had is like, what has this recent experience been like? And I have to say, we're also staking out a new type of travel here. Chip comes from the travel industry, as does Christine, and I think moving towards transformational travel, moving towards experiential travel, moving towards travel that actually gives people some meaning, helps them build. In midlife, the three things that kind of help you thrive are wellness. So that can be personal wellness or financial wellness, community, and community in the face of a loneliness epidemic in the United States, and purpose, right? Something that is more important than you are. So a lot of what we're doing is not just travel, but it's helping people to reconnect to those three key personal elements to make their lives thrive, as you said, so that you can actually live on. There's a researcher called Becca Levy who showed that a positive mental attitude towards aging can add 7.5 years to your life. The research came out of Yale. So it's sort of it's utterly fascinating that the way we think about aging impacts the way that we age. So that's what we're up to.
That's huge. And the other thing that now is happening to you is you're becoming a thought leader and a book author with your own name going to be on the book this time instead of your Swiss billionaire. But tell us how that, because you obviously do a lot of listening in the course of your work at MEA. It's a big part, just listening to all these stories. And there are a lot, everyone's got a different story. And there's a lot of stories. And I think you've had 3,000 people through the 5 years that you've been operating, or going on 5 years that you've been operating. So it's a pretty sizable sample. And you've been listening to all those people. I know you listen intently because you listen to me and you listen to my story. But tell us what that did to your own listening skills, and then how you think about listening, because your book is going to be on listening, right?
My book's going to be actually on men's feelings.
Okay.
So how do men feel? And Jack, I got to tell you, even as someone who's done 5 years of this work, I find that even saying that out loud a little bit challenging, right? Us men are not supposed to have feelings. But the more I looked at it, the more I sort of looked into this subject, the more I was like, oh, wow, that is a fascinating through line for a lot of the work that I've been doing in Baja. Listening is this sort of core practice in terms of how do you listen to yourself? How do you pay attention to yourself? What do you care about? How do you feel about things? And listening to other people in terms of what are they saying, and how can you support them in what they're thinking about, and so on. And really there's a sort of simple rubric. If you don't know how you feel, then you don't know what feels good. And so you can't make things feel better. And if you do know how you feel, then you can make things feel better. And this impacts everything from our relationships, our relationship to ourselves, our companies, our businesses, the way that we operate in the world. So that's going to be the book. I'm pretty deep into it already, and I'm finding it fascinating. It turns out that not many of us are interested in how men are doing and how men feel. But there are some serious challenges there that are really worth exploring, not necessarily from an equity perspective, but from a perspective of, gosh, this is a design problem. You know, as we move into this, whatever the future is that's coming, not knowing how we feel about things as men is not terribly helpful. It may have served us well in the past, but moving forwards, how do we move away from that? So, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to be writing a book. I'm excited that it's something that feels like it has a greater purpose than just kind of, putting yourself on the roster.
Well,
and it'll be interesting.
It's a big topic. I'm sure there's a book. I want to remember the title. I think it's something like "I Don't Want to Talk About It" by Terrence Real. That was kind of groundbreaking at the time. It's a little dated now, but a lot of people still recommend it to men, particularly men at that 47.5-year point that are going through that bottom that they have to come out of, that whole process of coming out of it. But I think the stuff you're doing at MEA is the exact stuff that author did not have, that you can bring to the table. So I'm really excited to hear about what you're doing. And if you want someone to kind of go through it and give you some comments, critical feedback, constructive feedback,
I'd love it
to do that for you, because I am a voracious reader. I'm a voracious listener. I do a lot of that in my work as a mediator. I do a lot of that in my work as a counselor. I try to avoid litigation, but look, if you have to try a case or you have to take an appeal, you do that work legally. But I often think, hey, like Lincoln, even if you're a great lawyer, oftentimes the results are not as good as when you can get parties together to actually make a deal that would be far better. And often it's a far better result. So, I could see a lot of goodness coming out of what you're doing, which is why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because I think it's a marvelous thing that you've done at MEA and in your own life, in that transformation for what I'll call the Silicon Valley rat race to something that is your human potential being amplified. So congratulations, really, Jeff. I have to applaud you in a big, big way. You, Chip, Christine, the whole group of you, what you're doing is phenomenal. And I hope the word gets out, because I recommend MEA to all my friends and hope that they'll take me up on it. And hopefully this podcast will support it as well.
Thank you, Jack. I really feel that we're onto something. And, every signal is good. You have a lot of investors, you have a lot of people in the sort of the Silicon Valley area listening to this podcast. I think there are personal reasons to do this. I also think there's real reason, as you're looking at your businesses and your work, to think long and hard about this demographic and the demographic shifts in our country. In the US, the over 50s hold about $8 trillion worth of resources. It is an astonishing concentration of generational wealth. It is one of the greatest concentrations of wealth in human history. And we don't tend to think of them as our market. We don't tend to think of people over 50. And if you look at marketing dollars, that's 90% of marketing dollars are spent on the under 50s, right? People in their 20s and 30s. Yeah. And it's like, wow, we really have to recalibrate to these sort of demographic changes, both personally. I'm going to live longer. I better make a plan as to how that's going to be great. And then also professionally, my customers, my clients, the people I'm serving are of a different generation than perhaps historically was the case.
So, Jeff, what's the target date for release of the book? Because I'd like to have you on after the book is out, after I read it, and hopefully I've given you some inputs on it.
Yeah, I think we're looking at around the end of 24.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a Christmas present.
Keep the good work up. I look forward to helping you with whatever I can do to help you along the way. And give my regards to Chip. I think what you, he, and Christine are doing are great, and you got a much bigger team now, so that's even better. And I support it. So I hope that's a good thing for you guys.
I hope so too. Take good care, Jack. Thank you so much for having us on.
Bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.